It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide. It ain't the left side.
Thank you, Solody. Welcome to another episode of On the FinSide here with Kat and Paul. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. I'm Brian Cat NFL on Twitter, and Paul is fanatic_pick. Be sure to ping us, send us a message, anything you'd like to see on the show. You know the drill. So the Dolphins fall to 3-10 on the season. I'm still trying to get my voice back here. Losing 22-21 to the New York Jets in a very uncharacteristically record-breaking game where the Jets and Dolphins combined for 10 field goals, 7 by the Dolphins and Jason Sanders, and 3 by Sam Ficken of the Jets. Actually, one kicker even missed a field goal each. Ficken missed an extra point. Jason Sanders missed a field goal. So, you know, if the Dolphins had won this game, Paul, and I know we talk about draft positioning or how much we care about it from week to week, the Dolphins are picking 4th right now. And had they beat the Jets would have been actually picking ahead of the Dolphins heading into week 15, and the Miami Dolphins would have had the 8th pick in the draft, which is exactly where they were in 2012 when they took Ryan Tannehill.
Not only would they have had the 8th pick in the draft, but they'd still have remaining games against the teams picking 1 and 2 in the draft. And I know I've said it before. I guess I'm overdue to say it again. This is one of those weird seasons where you can find positives in the world as far as wins or losses for the Dolphins, because yes, we want better draft position because we know we're not going to the playoffs, but we want the team to be competitive out there on the field because we want to be able to attract those free agents. I mean, with the number of mock drafts I've been doing, and I know it's way too early for anything real with that, if Miami's able to rebuild the majority of the offensive line and possibly grab a corner leading into the draft, it is absolutely beautiful what you can build with this team going via the draft next year with the picks that they have. So, I mean, it's you want to be able to entice free agents to come there. Show this heart that this CFL, XFL roster is showing under Brian Flores. I mean, watch Brian Flores at the end of that game. Hell yeah, I want to play for that man. That man's going to go to the ends of the earth for his players. And it's very much a scenario where win or lose, you could find reasons to be okay with it, which is weird to say.
Well, no, I agree with you, and that was kind of my feeling heading into this game. Is that, you know, after beating the Eagles and you're 3-9, had they beat the Jets in this game, and we both predicted that they would, and they're 4-9, be looking at the next 2 games against the Giants and Bengals, who are picking 1st and 2nd in the draft right now, and that could be 6-9, and then the Patriots may rest their players on the final week. And you know, the people who are very specific to I want the draft spot, that's all that matters because we're not in the playoffs. Fair enough, but I would be looking at that saying, okay, if you ran off the last 5 games of the year, it would have meant because so many players stepped up. And if so many players stepped up, that is tangible that you have going into 2020, where now you don't have to restock as much of your roster. And I think other teams would be coming out saying, yeah, you know what, it looks like they're building something pretty cool there in Miami. So, yeah, that was one thing. That's how I was looking at this situation going into this game. My other part of it, too, was, look, if the Dolphins had won this game 40-6 and destroyed the Jets and pounded them into the ground, which I was really hoping for beforehand, I would have said, okay, that's really worth it. You sweep the Jets, you stick it to Adam Gase, and you look like a team that's got a lot of players breaking out. But when it was field goal to field goal to field goal to field goal, mistake versus mistake versus mistake versus mistake on both sides of the football, I was starting to think, I don't think I want to win this game 18-16 and cost ourselves 4 spots in the draft.
Yeah, I could see where you get that feeling. I mean, it definitely was. There were 4 backbreaking things that happened in this game. Let's face it. Devontae Parker going out with the concussion. Albert Wilson going out. The Demaryius Thomas touchdown, to me, because you could see the ball moving as he crossed the goal line, because the ball came out and there really wasn't, and the ruling on the field was that it was an incompletion. To me, there wasn't enough conclusive evidence on a replay from any angle that should have enabled them to overturn it, because you need that conclusive, definitive evidence to overturn the call on the field, and they didn't have it. And that pass interference review of a non-call on what would have been fourth down was absolutely backbreaking, and to me, it wasn't enough to warrant it. It's almost like the refs have overcorrected too far in the other direction at this point. And those are the four things that cost Miami this game, everything else aside.
Devontae Parker going out early hurt. I mean, 2 catches for 28 yards. He only played 18 snaps and then left with a concussion. I'm glad it's not something worse like a ACL tear that would have, hurt Parker and the Dolphins in the next year. But going back to your 3 points there, Albert Wilson went down and it took another receiver off the field. So Isaiah Ford gets in and actually has a career day for himself. The third and fourth, I got to tell you, I disagree with you because, I somewhat disagree with you. On the Demaryius Thomas touchdown, I thought overall they got the call. That if I had to pick one side, I thought it was a touchdown. I thought he had enough security over the ball for it to be a touchdown. I am a little surprised they overturned it, given that how much conclusive evidence you need. The other one though, the Nick Needham. I do think I got to say it was pass interference, and if you take a look last week when they overturned the Devontae Parker pass interference, where it's supposed to be fourth down, instead the Dolphins have it first and goal at the 1. I thought it was a similar thing. Needham had his hand wrapped around his shoulder before the ball got there, and it was the same thing last week with Jalen Mills against Devontae Parker. I like that they're kicking up the gears a little bit more on these pass interference calls.
See, my thing with that though too is, so I'm going to go back to the first one, and I think you kind of made the same point I had, which was there wasn't enough conclusive evidence. So ultimately, if the call on the field had been touchdown, I don't think they had enough conclusive evidence to overturn it in either direction based on what the video replays show versus the call on the field. So for that one, it's, again, if they had ruled it a touchdown initially, fine. But because they had not ruled it a touchdown and there wasn't that conclusive evidence. For the Nick Needham one, it burns me a little bit because of the fact that, A, it was a non-call on the field. It wasn't anything blatant and egregious, and it's not anything that if they were outside the 2-minute warning, the Jets would have been able to challenge because the Jets were out of timeouts. So it left a very sour taste in my mouth because of the fact that there were so many points in the game that they could have done the same thing in both directions and didn't. So, I mean, to just pull that in a critical moment for something that really wasn't blatant, it bothers me because ultimately that's something that if they start doing that for everyone that they're not sure about, that's a non-call on the field without challenge flags, you name it, it's going to slow the game down to a ridiculous level, and I'd rather they not be able to review it at all.
Yeah, I feel a little bad for Needham because he also had one reversed against the Browns a few weeks ago. So he's been the target of a lot of these here. When it comes to Needham, I first point the finger at him because if he lets Demaryius Thomas catch that pass right there, it's not. I believe it's not a first down, and it's fourth and something, and they're attempting about a 56-yard field goal. So that second one I have absolutely no problem at all with. I don't care if they slow the game down. I want them to get the call right. I mean, look, we spend all week on football. On Sunday, I don't mind watching a 3.5-hour game instead of a 3-hour game. That's completely okay with me. But I do understand what your point is there, and a lot of people do have that opinion too. But I want them to get the call correctly. Now, another thing about that play, Paul, is if that second Nick Needham pass interference isn't called at the end of the game, it's a very different storyline that we're talking about here of what happened in the last couple of minutes. Because to go up 21-19, Patrick Laird catches a 21-yard pass beautifully along the sideline, looking like a wide receiver out there. That allows the Dolphins to go up by 2 points with just a minute left. And when the Jets are driving down the field, Andrew Van Ginkel, who got extended action, got 35 snaps in this game, gets the sack to make it 3rd and 17 on that play. We could be talking about Laird and Van Ginkel as the two people that put this game away.
Completely. I mean, I love seeing Van Ginkel in this game. I really am curious to see how this kid develops. I mean, because we've got to remember he's only a couple games into his NFL career. He was on IR most of the year. I do view him as very much a Vince Beagle type, which there's a role for on this team. And yeah, I think Patrick Laird has really cemented his claim on the 3rd down running back position for next year. He's not somebody that you're probably going to trot out there very often on 1st and 2nd down, except for in wrinkle situations. He's not going to be that guy that plows the ball between the tackles. He's not going to be the guy that runs sweeps very often. But you run a lot of draws, a lot of screen plays with him coming out of that backfield, and he can absolutely be lethal against opposing teams. So absolutely love that fact.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And the term I'm using for some of these players, like Patrick Laird, like Keaton Sutherland, like some more John Jenkins is rosterable. He's a rosterable player right now, and he's somebody that could be. I mean, if in the off season, if you get a J.K. Dobbins from Ohio State or a Najee Harris from Alabama at the end of the 2nd round, and you pair him with Patrick Laird and maybe throw another veteran in there, I think you're sitting pretty good at the running back position. So I'm just trying to plug some of these guys in on the depth chart for 2020 so that we're not having to spend as many resources in the draft and free agency to do that. So, Paul, let's take a look here at the game, the position by position. At quarterback, I will say this. With Ryan Fitzpatrick at quarterback, they move the football and they keep drives going, and that's kudos to him. Not just with his arm, but with his legs, too. His stat line, 21 for 37, 245 yards, no touchdowns, an interception, but also 65 rushing yards. And each one of those 65 were very, very important, keeping drives moving throughout. On the other hand, he did miss a lot of throws. I mean, I thought Mike Gesicki was open quite a bit in this game, and he finishes with 1 catch for 6 yards. He missed Gesicki all game, and I don't quite understand why. He did miss a lot of throws with receivers that I felt were open all day. Even though he had 1 pick, it very easily could have been 3 or 4. When the Dolphins were down 16-6 at the end of the first half, James Burgess, the former Dolphin, who actually had a hell of a game other than the penalties, had a pick 6, and that would have made it a 3-score game at the end of the first half. And now we might be talking about a Jets rout there. So, a lot of mistakes. It felt like a very Fitzpatrick-y game right here. So, yeah, I'd probably give him a little bit higher grade if the Dolphins ended up winning. He did keep the offense moving. Let's go with the C.
I'm going to go with a B here for the fat man. That Burgess interception, Burgess did 2 things that canceled it out anyhow on that play. He had the pass interference, and then he also dropped the ball if you look at it on replay. So, yeah, it still should have been an interception for him if he hadn't kind of catapulted him around the wide receiver on that one. But, again, Burgess did have a hell of a game. I know I was talking about him a lot throughout the game. But really, it was amazing watching Ryan Fitzpatrick run. It looks like he has no business running the football. He looks like a fat man robbing a donut factory and running for his life, even though the cops are going to catch him, and he gets away far more than he should be able to. But, yeah, 7 carries, 65 yards, and a long of 20 in this one for Fitzpatrick running the ball, and he still put up almost 250 yards passing. He did miss a lot of receivers in this game. but he kept the emotion high for this team and ultimately led them down the field a great deal, even though he couldn't cap any of them off with a touchdown. So, yeah, a B- for him's nice and easy for me.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to change mine to a C plus because you sold me a lot on that. He did keep
I
drives
talked you
going.
into it. Fat man running from the donut factory brought you up a grade.
That's what did it right there. Running back, Paul. What's amazing to me is I look at the stat line and just how bad the Dolphins have been at running back and running the football this year. They're actually on pace to be the worst running team in NFL history for the 16-game schedule. And this game, though, Patrick Laird, 15 carries for 48 yards. Man, oh man, it just seemed like so much more because we're so used to seeing 7 carries for 7 yards and 9 carries for 10 and 10 carries for 5. So Patrick Laird ends up the game 15 carries, 48 yards, 4 catches for 38. So a total of 86 yards. And with under 2 minutes left in the game, he catches that pass along the sideline. It should have been the game-winning play, really. But overall, 3.2 yards a carry. I can't give him a considerably high grade. Nobody else really got onto the field that much. Gaskin had a few touches, not much to note. So overall, I'm going to go ahead and give a C plus here to the running back spot in Patrick Laird.
Yeah, it is amazing how much 15 carries for 48 yards felt like, especially after everything we've been through this season. I mean, Christ, that's a good 8-game stretch for Kalen Balazs. But imagine how good it's going to feel next year when we have a real running back. No insult to Patrick Laird. He's going to be a great third down back. He's going to be a pesky pain in the side for a few folks. And he's definitely carved a role out on this team. But if you get like a Chuba Hubbard running the ball next year with Patrick Laird coming in on third downs, it's going to look tremendously beautiful. I mean, Patrick Laird, 15 for 48, that's like half a season for Kalen Balazs right there. That's a good 8 games. And just to add to your 7 carries for 7 yards, half the time that was 7 carries for 7 yards with a long of 9 for freaking Kalen Balazs. So,
yep,
more power to Patrick Laird. It's a whole different offense with him on the field than it was with Balazs.
Yeah, it is, because you've got the underneath route, you got a better blocker, you've got, sadly, a better everything, and which is amazing given that Laird isn't special at anything. He's just getting the job done underneath and taking the yards that are there. So, also amazingly, Laird has already more total yards on the year than Kalen Balazs did. Balazs had, I believe, 198. Patrick Laird got over 200 in this game for the season. I'm going to throw it back to you at receiver and tight end.
No, the tight ends were, as you pointed out earlier, I mean, Gesicki got open, but he also had a few alligator arm plays in this game, which does drag things down a little bit. The fact that he couldn't get on the same page as Fitzpatrick was troubling. After frickin' Devontae Parker and Wilson went down early, it was great to see my guy, Isaiah Ford, get his 6 catches for 92 yards. If he played a full game, he would have had his first 100-yard game. And then your guy, Alan Hearns, sold me a little bit on that contract extension this week. I think he's probably one of the smaller possession receivers I've seen before, but it really feels like he's a possession receiver for this team at this point. And there's a role for that. So outside of those two, not a lot to write home about. Durham Smythe had a tiny little catch, and then the rest of the catches went to the running backs. Mac Hollins did get on the field, did draw a few things here and there, but ultimately wasn't a big factor in this game. I can give the wide receiver position. I'm going to give him. You know what? I'm gonna bump him to a B-. I was gonna go C+. They just barely rock into the B- range.
Yeah, I'll give him that C+. Isaiah Ford, good for him. Just going back to Virginia Tech in his final year, I felt so bad for him, and also so happy the Dolphins drafted him because I thought it was a steal. This was at the time Virginia Tech's all-time leading receiver, and he was supposed to go really second, third round. He didn't work out very well. He had injuries, and didn't stick out in one particular area, but he was a good football player. So he almost went undrafted, and the Dolphins drafted him in the 7th round. He's been on and off the roster. Overall, just 2 catches for 9 yards in his NFL career. He gets on the field and he makes the most of his opportunity. And now projecting to next year, I mean, if you've got Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, hopefully he's healthy, Jakeem Grant, hopefully he's healthy, Allen Hurns and Isaiah Ford, I think when you look at the rest of this team, wide receiver may be a position that you can leave alone unless somebody of real value comes in. Yeah, Gesicki, like I said, I expected him to have a bigger game. I counted at least three times that he was one-on-one in the red zone, and Fitzpatrick just missed him. He missed him all throughout the game. He had 5 targets, and I thought he very easily could have had the ball put on him for all of them. So, yeah, I'm going to give him a C+ there. Offensive line, typically we talk about how the interior of the line has the ability to be serviceable throughout the game, especially if they're continuing to keep the ball moving downfield and take some of the pressure off that line. This interior offensive line in this game was just straight garbage. I mean, Daniel Kilgore got destroyed by nose tackle Steve McClendon all game. And Evan Boehm is really breaking my heart here because I loved when they traded for him. But 2 of the last 4 games, he's been just as bad as the others. And then at left guard, the real interesting development is Michael Dieter only plays 9 snaps. Keaton Sutherland actually gets in there and arguably has the best day of any of the offensive linemen. At the tackle spots, Julian Davenport had his best game. Good for him. I'm not sold on him in the least, but a very good game for him. And at right tackle, Jesse Davis, I think, is starting to put some decent games together. I'm not saying he should be the Dolphins' right tackle next year, but when he's not facing a speed rusher, he's a pretty serviceable player. I think either way, Jesse Davis is going to be at one of those offensive line spots next year. But Michael Dieter, trending down right now. The good thing with him is I think when he adds strength in this offseason, you combine that with his intelligence and his ability to play all the spots along the offensive line, I think he's going to provide value, hopefully somewhere, and he's not another Dolphins 3rd-round draft bust on the line. So, but the only reason that this line can look halfway decent throughout the game is because Fitzpatrick gets the ball out of his hands so quickly too. So I can't give him any higher than a D.
I'm going to go with a C for this offensive line in this game. They weren't great, but you saw them open up a little bit more in the run game, and the fact that Patrick Laird's on the field does help them out. I agree with a lot of the things he said. I mean, I will give Daniel Kilgore credit. He had a beautiful tackle on Clive Wolford after Fitzpatrick lateraled him the ball. But, no, in all seriousness, I mean, they kept Fitzpatrick fairly clean in this one. Jets only had 2 sacks, and one really is only a sack in name only. Fitzpatrick had already tucked and was running with the ball, and they still got credit for a sack on the play. And, I'm not going to crap all over the line for that. It was well outside the pocket, and really, they gave him plenty of time on that play. So, I mean, don't forget, this is a pretty damn good Jets defense overall, even though they're missing a few of their starters. And it's a well-coached unit with Greg Williams. I hate to say that. I hate to say well-coached. The team isn't well-coached as a whole, but that defensive unit is definitely pretty well-coached. And they've got some good players on that defense. I mean, you look at what James Burgess did in this game. You look at what Neville Hewitt did in this game. Foley Fatukasi doesn't show up on the stat sheet, but he's a pretty big force in that middle. And along the rest of the defensive line, and Miami's Island of Misfit Toys offensive line did okay in this game. So I can comfortably give them a C.
Yeah, as far as their defense, their run defense is unbelievably good. They're allowing the opposing running backs less than 3 yards a carry this season, which is really unheard of. I mean, I've got the stats in front of me here at running back. Running backs against the Jets, 271 carries, 804 yards, 2.97 yards a carry. That is one of the lowest I've ever seen. Excuse me. So on the defensive line, I agree with you that they're disciplined and it's a pretty good unit, very underrated unit. But in that back seven, they are decimated. And when you're talking about James Burgess and Neville Hewitt at inside linebacker that are taking the places of the C.J. Mosleys and the Avery Williamsons and the Blake Cashmans that went down, that's something the Dolphins should exploit. And they did throughout this game at certain points. So the offensive line, though, what I can't get over is Steve McClendon and Quentin Williams flat out destroying plays. And we don't see it a lot because Fitzpatrick gets out of there so quickly so many times. So anyway, we all know the offensive line needs to be fixed. Let's move on to the defensive side of the ball. The big story before this game was Taco Charlton was inactive, and we've been talking about him as kind of an overrated player. You have been doing that more so than me, and Taco was argued to me coming off his best game of the year. But it was a coach's decision on here. It wasn't a disciplinary thing. It was a game plan thing, according to reports. And what that probably meant is that the Dolphins knew it was going to be more of an inside the hash marks, smash mouth type game that lends itself more to defensive ends like Avery Moss and Charles Harris instead of the outside rushers like Taco Charlton. But overall on defense, Sam Darnold goes 20 for 36, 270 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. And at running back, Ty Montgomery and Bilal Powell combined for 3.75 yards a carry, 28 for 105. So good job from the run defense. When I look at the front seven, Wilkins and Gotcha, usual solid self. Raekwon didn't have one of his better games. I thought Baker had a couple of big plays here. He had the face mask that extended one drive, but he also had a great stop on a 4th and inches where he blew up into the backfield. So good for him for that. Vince Beagle, again, as a pass rusher, he's not doing what he was earlier in the year, but I think he's becoming a more well-rounded player. And Andrew Van Ginkel, not quite as twitchy as Beagle, but same comes from Wisconsin as well. He's built more tall like a silo. He's a little bit stiff, but he's very opportunistic, and you're starting to see what Patrick Graham and Brian Flores want to see in these outside linebackers in this defense here. So Van Ginkel had the only sack, a little bit more pressure than we're used to, but still not quite good enough. Overall, when I look at this unit, front seven, I'm going to go with a B-.
I'm going with a B for these guys. I mean, yeah, Jerome Baker had that face mask penalty. I loved that play where he and Rafe McMillan kind of tag team blowing it up in the backfield on 4th down. I mean, it just was utterly beautiful. And then you look at Davin Godchow. He had another solid game. He's not going to do anything most of the time that blows you away. But he's performing a role for this defensive line, and it's absolutely perfect. The one guy that I'd really like to see upgraded this offseason is Sam McGuavin. I know we were talking about maybe he had a little bit of a breakout against the Eagles last week. Looks like he's back to his usual self again now. I just don't see enough out of the guy to warrant having him on the field here. And it's sad because, I mean, he looked like somebody that could really be special in the preseason. Outside of that, Charles Harris, who I know we've been talking about developing over the last few weeks, seemed and felt like he took a little bit of a step back in this game and really wasn't a factor at a point where he should have been able to. But, again, I can go with a B for these guys.
And an interesting note, too, is Van Ginkel had 35 snaps, Aguavion, I think, had 33, and Charles Harris and Avery Moss both had in the mid-20s. So it's interesting that Van Ginkel comes in and is immediately starting to show that he's worthy of more on that. But yeah, and it's not a surprise too that especially you and I think both of us have more of an issue with Sam McGuavin and Taco Charlton because they seem to be the most undisciplined players in the front seven. So they're going to have those games where they get more sacks and more big plays, and we saw that with Aguavion and the Eagles game. I mean, he had several very big plays, very game-changing plays there toward the end. But yeah, as it projects to the long term, we know that Patrick Graham and Brian Flores like to have discipline on that front seven if it's going to be that Patriot style defense. Defensive back, Paul. I'm losing my voice, so I'm gonna go ahead and throw it to you.
No worries here. I'm going to differ with what a lot of news pundits out there were saying in this game, and I'm going to differ with what even the commentators were saying during this game. Commentators and national pundits were saying, oh, the Jets receivers were running wide open all day and destroying the Dolphins secondary. Now, that's true of Robbie Anderson in this game. I mean, Robbie had 7 catches, 116 yards, and a touchdown. It was pretty big. But you look across the rest of the roster, after Robbie Anderson, the guy with the most receiving yards had 37. Most catches, 3. So, and we already have that questionable Demaryius Thomas touchdown that we've gone back and forth on. I don't feel like rehashing. The tight ends did not kill Miami in this game. I know Ryan Griffin left real early in this one. But again, this is a team that has some weapons at the wide receiver position in Jamison Crowder. They have weapons out of the backfield in Ty Montgomery. They've got Demaryius Thomas, who's a little bit of a shadow of himself, and Bilal Powell can catch balls out of the backfield. So really the fact that other than Robbie Anderson, they were able to limit them, and it was truly a bend but don't break defense here. You also look at the fact that if it wasn't for, I believe it was Ken Webster, missing completely on that last drive the Jets had, that's another 40 yards for Robbie Anderson right there, and you've got him. You're looking at 6 catches for maybe 80 yards, which isn't hugely destructive when you look at the ability there. This defense continues to play above and beyond in the secondary, given the fact that I think the only starter from the beginning of the year is Eric Rowe, and he's playing a completely different position now. So, and half the guys in the secondary weren't even on this roster a month ago. So really, I can give this secondary a B here as well.
Yeah, Sam Darnold went 20 for 36, so he completed just 55.5% of his passes. I do think he left a lot on the field, specifically on 3 plays where, Robbie Anderson had 7 for 116 and a touchdown. Very easily could have been more. There were at least 3 longer plays left on the field too. So there's that. But yeah, even if you put in those 3, it's not a terrible day for the Dolphins defensive backs. And after in the second half, the Jets only scored 6 points, so they certainly tightened up too. The way I saw a little bit of separation here in the players we need to step up. I thought Nick Needham, even though he allowed 2 touchdowns, he comes back and he continues to fight. And he's also somebody that is covering the opposing number 1 receiver usually. That Demaryius Thomas touchdown, yeah, I do agree with you. That could have gone either way. And he was right there with the guy. And then on the other one, Robbie Anderson's first touchdown, it's hard to tell in that if it's Nick Needham or if it was Ryan Lewis, who really gave him a clean break off the line of scrimmage. I put that more on Lewis. So you got Needham there. And then Stephen Parker and Adrian Colbert, I thought, played phenomenal at free safety. And Stephen Parker, for a defense that hasn't had that many big plays, gets another great interception here. He had one against the Colts, too. That was fantastic. Adrian Colbert has dropped a few interceptions, but I thought he was in good position all game. He'll be interesting to look at here for the future. Ken Webster, unfortunately, is not passing the test over the last 2 games, which is somebody I've really been hopeful for. But, on that drive that put the Jets up by 2 scores, Robbie Anderson smoked Webster twice. One time the ball was overthrown by Darnold, but that could have been a 60-yard touchdown for him too. So you're starting to see some separation between these guys. But, like we said before, I think what you're going to see is you're going to see Jamal Wiltz and Nick Needham and hopefully a few other guys down the road here be those 5th, 6th, 7th defensive backs next year. And that's not an insult to them because they're going to be on the field 30, 50% of the snaps, even if they're the 6th or the 7th guy. So As far as the grade's concerned, because I did think Darnold should have thrown for more, I'm going to give him a C plus. And Paul, I'm going to throw it back to you there for special teams.
Yeah, the Colonel should have been perfect in this game. If not for a botched hold by Matt Hawk, we'd be talking about the Colonel basically winning this game for the Dolphins, and it would have meant the Jets had to go for a touchdown at the end there. But unfortunately, no, we're not talking about that. I mean, it's. I thought the coverage units were good in this game. I really didn't have an issue with Matt Hawk punting the ball. The only knock I have was that botched hold, and it is what it is. I can give the special teams unit here an A minus.
I'm right there with you on the A minus. I mean, yeah, he did miss a field goal, but he hit 7 of them. I mean, and a few of them were from yeah, he had some shorter ones, but he also had a 53-yarder and a couple in the 40s too. And in New York, it was 40 degrees out and the wind was blowing, so it's not easy to hit those. And yeah, the rest of special teams unit, not much to report on. I mean, Marcus Sherrills dropped a punt but picked it up and ran it about 15 yards, so he made up for that. Matt Hawk had 1 punt for 45 yards. And an interesting stat, if you go back to 8 minutes left in the first quarter of the Eagles game, Matt Hawk has punted the ball 2 times. So in 113 minutes of football, the Dolphins have punted twice. That's telling you that they're staying on the field on offense, moving the ball, and scoring points. Too bad a few more of these were not touchdowns, but yeah, overall, Jason Sanders, we could be looking at Special Teams Player of the Week in the AFC for a 3rd time. Paul, who is your player of the game and your Coke Bus player of the game?
Player of the game, I wanted to give it to Isaiah Ford. I really did. But like you just pointed out with the Colonel, I mean, he kicked 7 field goals in this game when the offense stalled. And really, that could have been 8, and it was such a difference maker for this team. I mean, he was so reliable, and I won't put the one he missed fully on him because of the botched hold. So I'll give it to the Colonel in this game as far as player of the game. As far as my Coke Bus player of the game, I think you said enough about Ken Webster in this one. I mean, I'm pretty sure it was him that missed on that last drive and really let Robbie Anderson run free. He got eaten up by Anderson in this game. I know a lot of folks did, but he did. It felt like a little more than others, and really just wasn't the factor either of us expect him to be. Hopefully he can develop. Otherwise, he's probably going to end up replaced this offseason.
Yeah, for my player of the game, I'll take a little bit of a different route, and I'm going to go with free safety Stephen Parker. You know, he had that interception, and when he was on the field for the rest of the game, I'm disappointed he was only on the field for 25 snaps. But Adrian Colbert played every snap, believe it or not, at free safety. But this is a player that I'm really looking at for the rest of the year that, hey, you could be a solid depth guy moving forward, and Colbert could be too. So at defensive back, you got a lot of balls in the air there. But he's somebody that if we're saying at the end of the offseason, you know what, Colbert, Eric Rowe, and Stephen Parker played really well at safety, that could be another position you say, you know what, we're going to spend our money elsewhere, or we're just going to draft a player in the mid-rounds instead of making this a huge priority. So kudos to him for that one there. As far as my Coke Bus player of the game, I've got to give it to Dan Kilgore. I mean, just destroyed by Stephen McClendon all game, and it really could have caused a lot of problems if Fitzpatrick wasn't so good at getting outside the pocket, and Patrick Laird didn't bust a couple of bigger plays. So there you have it on there. The Dolphins are 3-10. They go back to New York next week to play the New York Giants, and then they play the Bengals and a Patriots team who may or may not be resting its players. So we'll see what happens the rest of the year, Paul. We will be right here on the FinSide. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. I am Brian Kent NFL. Paul is Fanatic_Pick on Twitter. thank you for your patience with my voice here today as I continue to get better. And Paul continues to get better, too. It's been a rough week for us with the health. And if it's not on the right side and it is not on the left side, it is on the FinSide. So, OD, take us home.
It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide. It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the FinSide.
Listen, Dolphins fans across the land all tuning in to see what Brian, Cat, and Paul about to